All right, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, and it's Talk Back for Thursday. John King is over there. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Peter.
All right, and we have guests in the studio this morning, and we're going to talk about the political science and the whole idea of around nonprofits, right?
Yeah, it's political science on the radio day, and we have a different sort of tack. Usually we're debating whether or not to invade Syria or launch Donald Trump into space or whatever, but today we're going to be talking about... which I'd vote for, I guess. But today we're talking about nonprofits, and we have Andrea Vernon, who specializes in nonprofit education, teaching people how to work in nonprofits and how to make nonprofits work, I guess.
How to make them profitable.
And we also have someone who actually works at a nonprofit, CEO of United Way. Susan Hay Patrick is in the studio. So welcome both of you to the show. Now I have no idea what we'll talk about, but I'll let you have the microphone.
Oh my goodness! All right.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
All right. So let's start with you, Andrea. Tell us a little bit about what you do, so I can see you here. About what you do at the University of Montana and the type of courses that you teach there.
Great. Yes, thank you. We have several different types of nonprofit administration programs that students can tap into. Some are here on the campus itself, and some are online programs, so people from across the state or across the world can really tap into some of our coursework around nonprofit administration. We try to build a set of competencies for people who aspire to be professionals in the sector. So we teach courses on things like grant writing and board development, fundraising, program planning, volunteer management, all of those very specific and unique aspects that are involved in managing and running an effective nonprofit organization.
Now, when we play our commercials throughout the radio station, those are all non-for-profit businesses, right? And but tell me I know this may sound like Dr. Obvious question. What's the difference between a for-profit business and a nonprofit and a not-for-profit? Because there is kind of a tier there, right?
Well, nonprofit and not-for-profit are essentially the same thing,
Okay.
but people have different types of descriptors, different terms that they use when they're talking about the nonprofit sector.
They're synonymous. Yeah.
Yes, it's often called the third sector or the independent sector.
Or you'll hear NGOs for non-governmental organizations.
Right, yeah.
That's an international term.
Yes. So there's a lot of terms around this sector, but essentially it's a sector filled with organizations that are built around a charitable purpose. They're there to meet a community need that's not being met by either government or the for-profit sector. So the nonprofit sector really exists to fill those gaps and provide services and programs.
So with that in mind, with the things that Montana is lacking that might need a nonprofit, would you like to propose what realm of life do you feel that is not being met by government or other nonprofits in Montana that we could use some extra leg up, I guess, another nonprofit for?
I'm not sure we need any more nonprofits. That was a little bit of a leading question.
Right, exactly.
But we have a lot of our nonprofits really revolve around education. Anywhere from early childhood education all the way up through adult and education and beyond. So education is a big field where we see nonprofit organizations. Health is probably the biggest sector or the biggest subsector within the nonprofit field. Many of our largest hospitals in Montana are nonprofit organizations. In Missoula in particular, we see a lot of environmental organizations, those organizations that are trying to help preserve and protect the beauty that surrounds us. So those are some of the gaps. But Susan, do you have others?
No, but I think it's important to note that most of the nonprofits in the country were created since 1980, and that kind of coincided with a government retrenchment where government sort of got out of the business of doing some historical things that government had done. So food banks, for example, are a great example. That coincided with a decline in support for government food assistance programs. So we've had an explosion of food banks in our country. So I think that nonprofits originally were created to fill the gaps, as Andrea said, to provide services that weren't being provided by government or the public sector or the for-profit sector. The trend in the last few decades seems to be that they're now called upon to be the safety net rather than to pick up the people who sort of fell through the holes in the safety net. So 1 in 7 Missoula residents go to the food bank, for example. Imagine Missoula without a food bank to serve a certain segment of the population that just can't. There's too much month at the end of the money for a lot of people who can't afford groceries for the entire month, most of them working.
All right. Now, from what the main criticism that I hear, having done this radio program for about 5 years now, the main criticism that I hear about, quote, nonprofits is that A, there's way too many of you, and B, okay, how can I put this?
We always have our hands out.
Yeah,
Looking for money.
Here's one example. I have some friends who own businesses downtown, and I was visiting with one of them the other day, and they said, I actually had to hire somebody to be out front for me because every single day I have no fewer than 10 people walking in with a jar or a basket or whatever, there's this cause, there's somebody had a heart attack, somebody had a baby with disabilities, and they want to put something, and I couldn't get my work done because I was so busy either saying yes or no, or people would walk out crying or whatever. So why is that? What is going on out there that there's just such a need that is not being met by the traditional nonprofits that are already here?
Well, I think Missoula is a place that attracts very passionate-minded people in one sense, and that I think helps to build an environment, a climate where nonprofit interests are very high. So some of the big things in our community, like the environment, more recently the refugee situation. I mean, there's lots of organizations and lots of people with very passionate interests that are quite vocal about those interests. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of nonprofits in our community, because we're a very engaged population. People want to be involved in community issues, and they start out as voluntary sort of associations that then kind of formalize perhaps into nonprofit organizations. And yes, I imagine your friend down in downtown Missoula is correct, because there's a lot of nonprofits that are knocking on the doors trying to forge partnerships with businesses for either fundraising or if there's similar interests, in regard to how they can work together to try to meet a particular need. So there are a lot of demands placed on the for-profit sector when the nonprofits are constantly knocking on those doors.
So let me ask you this, and Susan, maybe you'd be the best person to answer this, because every week we get a whole lot of requests from people saying, can you publicize our event or our fundraiser or whatever? Is there a clearinghouse, and I know you're with the United Way, which is a different story, but is there a clearinghouse where people who have a benefit or whatever that they want to advertise, that so they don't have to do all the legwork of going to all the radio stations and all the TV stations and all the newspapers and everything individually? Is there such a thing?
No, but I'm going to leave this radio station and go start one. No,
I would think that the internet could be a really
and
useful
we are
tool.
the fiscal sponsor of the Missoula Nonprofit Network, which does a very widely disseminated weekly that advertises events. Many nonprofits are turning principally to social media to advertise their events.
Right.
Many don't even send out paper invitations anymore. It's all electronic. But I think we always will be looking to our media partners to help us spread the word to your audiences. On the thing about, the demand, and I think it's important to remember a couple of things. One, we are not just asking for money. We are economic powerhouses. The nonprofit sector in Montana is the largest overall employer, I believe, in terms of wage paying.
It's third behind.
Oh, it's okay. One of the largest.
Yes, one of the top three.
One of the top three.
Yes.
And that's hundreds of millions of dollars in ancillary benefits that ripple out into the economy, plus wages that we're paying. And speaking of the number of nonprofits, several years ago, about 15 years ago, I think, Forbes magazine had this little squib in one sentence that said Missoula, Montana had more nonprofits per capita than any other city in the country. And that, Mark Twain said, a lie is halfway around the world before truth has time to put its pants on.
Okay.
That wasn't entirely correct. And if you look at a couple of things, it really reduces the number that he listed, which was hundreds or something. But if you take out the chapters of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, which are around the world and all headquartered in Missoula, Montana. That subtracts out a substantial number. And then if you count only wage-paying, income tax filing nonprofits, those that file a 990 with the IRS, that reduces the number even further. You know, a lot of people fall in love with the promise of their own idea and create a nonprofit, but never raise money, never hire staff, just sort of get the tax-exempt status, and the idea sort of stays there. But there are only, I think, about 250 wage-paying, tax-filing nonprofits in Missoula County, and I don't think that's an unreasonable number.
Okay, we're going to come right back. Up against the break, 721-1290. If you have a question for our guest, Andrea Vernon, who is a political science professor. She specializes in nonprofit administration. Susan Hay-Patrick, of course, well known as CEO of the Missoula United Way. We'll be right back. All right, we're back.
Oh, yeah.
On Talkback. Everybody's dancing for some reason. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Now, we're talking about nonprofits today, and we'd love to have your phone calls this morning. You might say, hey, I'm a nonprofit myself. You know what I mean? Anyway, John King, go ahead.
Yeah, we were at the end of the last segment. Susan Hay-Patrick was putting the pants on truth, and I was wondering if we could button those pants up and tell people exactly how many nonprofits are in Missoula. Do you know? How about in Montana? I mean, how much of this stuff does the professor of political science nonprofit division know?
And she was the president of the board of directors of the Montana Nonprofit Association.
Wow.
So she knows her stuff.
Well, I also have my notes right in front of me, which
Oh, and there's
helped
that.
tremendously. So,
Give me those.
so the Montana Nonprofit Association does a sector report that they put out every couple of years. And so this is their most recent one, and it shows statewide there's 2,086 wage-paying nonprofit organizations. There's over 6,000, like you mentioned earlier, in the state. But as Susan said, many of those are not wage-paying. They're small, very small organizations that still have a mission and a purpose, but you know they're kind of put in a different category when we talk about the types of nonprofits. And within Missoula County, we have 226. So county-wise, that's the highest in the state, behind Billings, which is 203, and Bozeman, which is at 170. So yeah, we do tend to have a higher percentage.
Is there one city in Missoula, one major city in Missoula that's, you might call it the state Grinch, that has the fewest amount of nonprofits?
There are none in Petroleum County.
Yes, we only have one county in the state of Montana with no
None?
501c3,
Yeah.
and it's just
Wow.
one. It's in Petroleum County.
Wow.
You're right. So
Well, they're all busy working for the oil companies.
it's a very
There are
tiny
not a lot of
county.
people there. but
Yeah.
There are
Right.
definitely underserved rural areas that people really struggle. I mean, you've probably heard that recently that suicides in Livingston, teen suicides, there are very few resources available in rural areas for mental health care. And
You know, it's funny that you say that, because my leading question earlier about whether or not there was a realm in life in Montana or in America that needed another nonprofit, my answer to that question would have been mental health, because you need something with personnel that is trained, a higher level of personnel than most nonprofits have to offer right now. I mean, you kind of have to create something whole cloth in order to do something, even on the scale of Montana. But it does seem to be one of those things that people slip through the cracks in. You know, They either end up in the prison system or jail or suicide.
Or dead.
Or
Right.
dead, yeah. So anyway, you want to respond to that, or I have another question after that?
Well, sure. We do. I mean, the Western Montana Mental Health is a nonprofit organization. So we do have lots of organizations, like I said, that are involved in healthcare, and some specifically within mental health care. But I certainly agree. That's an area where we need to see a lot more attention. And I see that as a cross-sector issue. I do think government needs to be involved in providing some of those services. Partnering with nonprofits, we are definitely seeing a blending of the sectors, much more so than we saw even 5 or 10 years ago, with nonprofits, for-profits, and government really coming together to identify the root causes of a problem and identifying the different roles that each of those sectors has to play in helping to address and resolve the problem.
Here's the mindset that I think most people have between a for-profit business and a nonprofit. The mindset is, okay, if I go to this for-profit business, they're going to ask me for a lot of money for whatever their product or service is. But if I go to a nonprofit, they're either not going to charge me at all, or or they're going to give it to me for free or for a very, very, very reduced rate because, after all, they're nonprofit. So, can you explain that? Maybe explain the disparity there.
Yeah, and Susan.
Well,
jump
many
into it.
many nonprofits do charge for their services,
That's the number one
and
source of
have-
revenue for nonprofits.
right? And
is a
have
fee for service.
very, very lucrative contracts to provide services with government agencies.
Like what?
I would say mental health care is a great example.
Okay.
A lot of education programs receive government funding. I think the federal government is certainly the largest funder of housing and homeless services in the nation and in Montana.
And when we look to healthcare, especially, a lot of the
Healthcare.
nonprofit hospitals, they're receiving money through the federal government for Medicare, Medicaid expenses. So that's actually one of the largest sources of revenue
Okay.
for that field.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We do have a caller on the phone, and we have a break coming up
We're 1
soon.
minute away from a
So
break.
we're going to actually let you put your headphones on during the break instead of rushing and knocking coffee over right now. Before we get there, one of my jobs is to push your buttons and to get you to talk about something that's engaging to the public. And one of the criticisms people have about nonprofits is when they aren't nonprofit, when it seems like people are taking advantage of the system to fill their own pockets, whether that be lawyers doing frivolous lawsuits.
That never happens in the for-profit
Oh, I'm
sector.
sure it does. I'm sure it does. But there's less hypocrisy, it seems. There's a little bit extra judgment, I think, on when nonprofits do it than when the for-profit sector does it. So I guess my question for you is this. Do you think we're running nonprofits in the United States the best way to prevent that sort of thing from happening?
Okay, we're going to come right back and have them answer that. We also have Mike on line 1, and John's answering line 2, and we have line 3 open. We're going to come right back. Okay, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. We have a short segment here, so get right to the phone. And Mike, you are on with Andrea and Susan. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, good morning to the two of you, and I'll tell you what, you're both too dang young to know what I'm talking about, but I'll let you here's what I'll tell you.
Fortunately, there are no
I
cameras
would
here.
disband all nonprofits to start with, and I'll tell you why, and it's real quick, and I'll stick with the churches. I remember when I went to church, you donated money, you gave money to church between you and God, and that was it. Now, when you become a nonprofit as a church, you give up your First Amendment right. All nonprofits give up their First Amendment right to speak their mind, because that's how the government controls you. And I don't know if you know that, but suddenly it was between you, the church, whoever was taking care of the money, and the IRS, and maybe God knew what you were doing too. I don't know. But that is what the problem is. And every time we post a nonprofit, my taxes go up because I have to pay for something I'm probably adamantly opposed to, because you don't pay taxes and you give up your First Amendment right. And it is a way we are going to ruin our country. We do not, because I have the paperwork. I started filling out the paperwork. I was going to put in for a nonprofit but it's just a way of sucking money out of and giving up a right that people fought and died for, your First Amendment right. Look at the churches. You go to a church, and every dadgum one will give you an envelope and say, put this in, and so you can take it off your taxes. Why should the guy down the street who adamantly opposes the teachings in that church have to pay the taxes that you didn't pay? I believe in giving as a thing. And by the way, when I was a kid...
Mike?
I'll put this...
Very quickly, because we're running out of time. I want to give him a
yeah.
chance to answer you.
All right.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the call.
I would
Okay.
just say message receive, and I would just have to respectfully disagree, but I just think there are way too many issues to debate.
Now, hold on. One quick question. We have 1 minute. Do nonprofits pay taxes?
Yeah, certainly. We are tax exempt from the IRS, but we pay payroll taxes, and just like every other employer, and we're run in very business-like ways. Many of us pay property taxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with regard to the church role, absolutely, churches have played a very important role in meeting community needs historically. Church attendance is down. We know that. That's a fact in our country. Organized religion, participation is down, and so that tithing is down as well. And the churches cannot meet all the needs of our community. So do we not want to have a food bank where families can go to be able to supplement that pantry when it's the end of the month, as Susan said? do we not want to have access to health care and services? So it's a balance. I agree. There's got to be a balance there. But I have to respectfully disagree that by somebody making a donation to a nonprofit, it doesn't mean my neighbor's paying more in taxes. It means I'm getting a tax deduction for that donation. But it's also a piece of the social contract that we have in this country that we can talk about a little later.
Yeah, we will. And we're going to take a break. Yeah, that's an excellent way to grab that. So we're going to come right back with more of Talk Back, another hour with these lovely ladies in studio. Love to have your calls at 721-1290. We'll be right back. Welcome back to hour number 2 of Talk Back, brought to you by Bull's Eyewear, where they offer some of the lowest prices in town on contact lenses. See Lynette at 2910 South Reserve. Nissan and Hyundai of Missoula under new management, where they're offering rebates, discounts, and 0% financing on a huge selection of inventory on Brooks near Southgate Mall, and by Selway Armory on Stockyard Road, where they have more guns and ammo than anyone in Missoula. The best prices in Montana. They're Montana's premier firearms dealer. Okay, we are back on Talkback now. We've been talking with Andrea Vernon and Susan Hay Patrick, where the subject is all about nonprofits. Of course, Missoula, as you know, has a lot of nonprofit organizations. So let's get to the phone and say good morning to Jim. Thanks for holding through the break, Jim. You're on. Go ahead.
Good morning, and I'd just like to say that I really enjoy your guys' show and listen as often as I possibly can. Thanks for being here. Thanks. My question for the ladies is this, and it's much more on a national level, and that is, how in the world can the NFL qualify as a nonprofit? I'll take the question off the air. Thanks.
The NFL, the National Football League, yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't know they were nonprofit.
I'm going to throw that one right to Andrea, because that...
There are many subsectors of the 501c3 category. So 501c4 organizations are what we're talking about. That's what we typically think of when we think of a nonprofit organization. There are 501c6, 501c4. 501c6 is more of an association of organizations. So that's where the NFL comes into play as a nonprofit. But they don't receive, donors don't receive tax benefits when they write a check to the NFL like they would to the United Way. So there are subsections within the IRS 501c3 categories.
Service clubs like Rotary and Kiwanis are
exactly.
in their own subsector.
In their own subsector.
I guess that's why it's so confusing. You can
exactly.
You can understand why people just don't understand the whole world of nonprofits, because there are so many different levels. It's like like a Jenga game. Where
exactly.
You have no idea which.
Well, we have a very complex tax code in all areas.
This is true.
Yes.
What Andrea and I really spend our lives working on are the 501c3s, and in some cases 501c4s, which are the advocacy-oriented nonprofits. But our careers are in the charitable, education, health sector of 501c3.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned the 501c3, 501c4, 501c6. How deep does the ladder go? I mean, how many different 501cs, and these are all different forms of corporations, right? Mm-hmm. Or nonprofit enterprises under the 501 banner?
If I remember my statistics correctly, I think there are 17 subsectors within the tax code. Wow. So it is extremely complex, and I think that adds to the general public's, confusion and just being unaware of the intricacies of this sector.
And I think that also illustrates the tremendous diversity of the sector.
Exactly.
It's like, speaking of anything in monolithic terms, we have very, very diverse nonprofits. The University of Montana, St. Patrick Hospital are nonprofits, but so is the Parenting Place, a very small nonprofit that does fabulous work. It's a very diverse sector.
Now, can you be a nonprofit and not be a corporation? Or do you have to file as a 501c3, 4, or 6 to be considered a nonprofit?
Is that where the C comes from? Is that right?
Because, for example, churches, I think by nature are a nonprofit without filing, correct?
I think they still have to file.
Yeah, I think they still file. They have different tax returns that they file, so they are in a different type of protected status within the 501.
To bring up what Mike was talking about earlier, okay?
Susan was going to respond to
Oh, okay. Well, let's do that. Let's get Susan on right now because I don't want to steal her thunder. Heaven help me. Hi, Susan.
God love him. I love Mike, and you know I love Mike, but
What's on your mind?
I totally disagree with him. I think, unfortunately, many people no longer go to church. He's from the generation where church was about the only option people had. And nowadays, sadly, in my family, I have 3 sons, and only one of them goes to church. So they are secular in many cases, which, in my humble opinion, is very sad. But we also have a lot of dedicated people like my sons who are involved in wonderful nonprofits that are not religious, and they do wonderful things for the world. And
Susan, now, forgive me, what is he doing?
Oh, they do all kinds of things for wildlife, and
Okay.
they volunteer for the homeless. And, there's so many things that nonprofits do that have nothing to do with religion per se. And so I guess what these ladies represent, and certainly as you folks know, I focus my attention because there are so many wonderful, wonderful programs for everything under the sun. I focus strictly on veterans because I can't save the whole world.
Well, Susan is the president of the
just
United
can't.
Veterans Council. in case
I
you
would
didn't
like
say.
to.
Yeah.
I would like to save the whole world, but I can't.
Okay.
So, and I think, the reason I have picked veterans is because everybody feels sorry for cute kids. Everybody feels sorry for people that are handicapped. Everybody feels sorry for adorable pets that have googly eyes. But when it comes, and wildlife that, are losing their habitat and all this jazz, but when it comes to veterans that maybe don't look so nice and maybe they haven't shaved and maybe they have bad breath and they have medical problems, a lot of times veterans are kind of ignored. And so that is why I focus on that. But thank God for the people, and I do mean thank God for the people that get involved with all the other things. And as Peter and John know, I also do get involved with wildlife, and I do get involved with other things. But we need a variety. And what is so magnificent about our country is that of all the countries in the world, I think it will be proven that Americans are the most magnanimous and the most generous and the most amazing people that ever have come to this earth.
And with that, I got to take a break. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, goodbye.
Appreciate it. All right, we're going to come right back. 721-1290. And when we come back, I want you to answer a question. If a church decided, as when we were talking about Mike, if a church decided that they wanted to get involved politically, if they wanted to get up from the pulpit and start, endorsing candidates or endorsing causes or whatever, is it possible for them to just say, we're canceling our tax-exempt status, we are a free speech organization, we're going to say, would they have to do that? So I want to ask you guys when we come back. So, okay. And we have all 3 lines open, by the way, 721-1290. We'll be right back. Everybody's twisted in the studio. 721. We have an actual dancer here in the studio. She was twisting while texting. Text and twist. I think it's a great skill to have. Anyway, Susan Hay Patrick joining us here in the studio with the United Way. Andrea Verna is also with us, political science professor, specializing in nonprofit administration. Okay, the question I asked you guys: churches. Let's say the guy said, "Okay, I'm tired of having to toe the line and not being able to address things from the pulpit that I really think are important. And yet I've been warned that if I do, we'll lose our tax-exempt status. Why not just get rid of it and go for it?" So, and I know you guys don't know a whole lot about the whole church thing, but I thought I'd throw that out there.
That's a good way to say it.
What are you implying?
No, nonprofits in general have a right to and a role to play in advocating and lobbying around issues that they're educated around.
Sure.
So, we have the youth homes, for example. They go to Helena and
Missoula Aging Services.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They all go to Helena and lobby during the legislative session to help inform our legislators about these issues Because
And
who
the
better than those
implications
people
of
in the
legislative
trenches?
decisions on
Yeah.
the lives of the people that they serve.
Exactly. So there really isn't a restriction on First Amendment rights in that sense. Where the line is crossed is a nonprofit cannot come out and say you need to vote for Joe Smith for this.
Can't
yeah.
endorse candidates.
Yeah, and you can't. You can encourage people to vote. Definitely, a lot of nonprofits are involved and get out the vote. With regard to churches, they're in a special category. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that area. But there are many instances of churches that do, sermonize to their congregation.
Well, yeah, all you have to
values
do is look
and
during the last election with Reverend
Certainly.
Wright and the fiery things that he said, and
Yeah.
they still
Right,
got their
And-
tax.
yeah, and a lot of
exempt
mega
status.
churches do that, on national and international television.
Exactly.
So.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I think I have a soundbite of Hillary at a gospel meeting on the deal there. But I wanted to ask you a question. This is from our listener Jerry. He had a really bad connection, so I couldn't get him on the air himself. But his question was about it used to be a nonprofit, but apparently they lost their status. They were the Stevensville Youth Baseball. It was a nonprofit out of Stevensville, I assume. And they want to know, how do you get into, what's the pathway to becoming a nonprofit? Because
Well,
they need to get their status back.
First of all, think twice. We do have a lot of nonprofits. We're not in the business of encouraging people. I get a lot of calls about how do I start a nonprofit, and I refer to myself as a dream killer when I say, really, what are you doing that's so special that no one else is doing? But there is a formal filing process that Andrea will now describe.
It starts with the Secretary of State's office. So there's forms on their website. People can download those. They're fairly self-explanatory. The Montana Nonprofit Association website, which is mtnonprofit.org, has a nice resource guide for people that are interested in starting nonprofits. So those are two very good resources to start with to be able to sort of reinstitute a nonprofit organization. But as Susan said, I do the same thing when students come into my office saying, I want to, get this specialization in nonprofit administration because I'm going to start this nonprofit. I say, well, first of all, look at the landscape around you. What organizations are doing similar work? Who are the people involved in this space around that issue? And how can you align
Who will you
with
be
them?
taking work away from?
Right. Well, how can you align yourself with
Right,
them
yeah, right.
instead of competing? Because
Right.
the resources are very finite, and we don't want to be knocking on business doors 10 times a day. So
Now,
how can we align?
So in that respect, it's totally 180 degrees from for-profit businesses
Oh, right,
because if I see somebody that's really successful and I know how to do that, I want to start my own business to try to take business away from them.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So,
Sure.
but with nonprofits, is it supposed to be more cooperative,
Yeah.
collaborative?
Yeah.
I think there is a really wonderful level of collaboration among Missoula nonprofits. We see it every day at United Way. I think there's a bit of a myth that everybody's out competing. Yes, there's certain competition for donors and attention, but the fact is that nonprofits work together every day. As you know, we administer Reaching Home, Missoula's 10-year plan to end homelessness. That's one extraordinary example where agencies providing services to homeless people and working on housing issues are all at the same table, figuring out what each individual role of their agency is to finding appropriate housing for our very diverse homeless population.
How do you decide who's in charge of a situation like that? Somebody's got to take the lead, right?
And I think that's the role that United Way plays with the
All right.
city and county's 10-year plan to end homelessness. That
Okay.
you need a backbone support organization, a convener, but nonprofits good nonprofits generally look to collaborate with their colleague organizations and not to duplicate services.
Okay, let's get Marilyn on the phone. Marilyn, you are on with Andrea and Susan. Go ahead.
Good morning. I was just wanting to clarify, there's a lot that churches and pastors and the members can do politically, but they are under the misconception, a lot of pastors are under the misconception that they can't do anything because there's sort of a double standard out there as to who gets gone after. What's the right word for that? Anyways, they get gone after if
Who
they
is prosecuted, basically.
I mean, a pastor may personally endorse a candidate for public office. A church may supply a candidate with their membership list. Churches can distribute materials informing members where candidates stand on the issues. A church can engage in legislative activities as long as the expenditures are kept below a substantial amount, usually below 5% of church's budget. So there's more things on the list. I've got a list here that was prepared by legal counsel, and I've handed it out to pastors over the years, but they just really shy away, unfortunately, from doing any of this because they're often attacked by. The attack usually comes from the left, but the churches on the more liberal churches, they're allowed to do this stuff and not be prosecuted. So, and then I also have something to say about there's
real quickly. We've got about a minute.
Some nonprofits, like Planned Parenthood, for instance, I don't understand. Their CEO gets over $600,000 a year. And a lot of the employees under that nonprofits make $300,000 a year, $100,000 a year. So, I think people who give to some of those organizations need to consider that too.
Okay, thanks for the call, and we'll answer those questions when we come back. And we have all three lines open, and we have a Facebook comment as well. So stay with us. We'd love to hear from you. Our guests are Andrea Vernon, a political science professor at the University of Montana who specializes in nonprofit administration, and the CEO of the United Way of Missoula County, Susan Hay.
Air guitar.
Okay, we're back, and the dancing continues. 721-1290 is our number. All right, all three phone lines are open. We'd love to hear from you. We've got about another 35 minutes here in our program with Andrea Vernon and Susan Hay Patrick talking about nonprofits. So go ahead, John.
Yeah, I have some Facebook comments. I'll read some of these, and then I have a big meta question coming up about the history of nonprofits. Jeannie says, I do not believe that people... Oh, sorry. Wrong Jeannie post. We got a little novel here. Starting with the first one. I was troubled by the passage of the school bonds in November as my property taxes went up significantly. I think that one of Susan's nonprofits was working on the passage of that bond. Nonprofits working to significantly raise our taxes is quite a problem, in my opinion, and could be quite dangerous for a community. I do not believe that people/nonprofits did enough homework on the bond, in that a lot of the aspects of the bond were not really good for our children, such as promoting bigger schools, middle schools, questionable curriculum issues. Yeah, so that's her
Message
line.
received.
All right. Katie says, how many nonprofits that receive money from the government versus how many receive no money from the government or are funneled through government-supported foundations? How many advocacy nonprofits? How many I think that's direct service nonprofits? Do you keep track of the percentage of costs of fundraising and salaries versus how much goes for actual service? We were actually talking about that during the break. And how many nonprofits compete directly with for-profit companies? Okay, there's a lot of questions, but let's break down the one that was really easy because we had touched on that in the break. When someone wants to know, hey, is this nonprofit actually doing, is it putting
What
most
it
of its
says
money?
it's doing,
Is it
yes.
actually helping people, or is it, some kind of cycle for thieves to take money from us?
In our world, we have so much more access to information, and transparency is a big issue in nonprofit organizations. It's very important for nonprofits to be transparent about their expenditures and their fundraising, and that is all available to the public through the Form 990 that nonprofits have to file. That's their annual tax return. They're available on websites like Charity Navigator and GuideStar. You can get in there and you can see nonprofits, when they file those tax returns, have to indicate the expenses toward fundraising, toward programs and services. You can see the top paid salary of the staff person, typically the executive director or CEO. So that information is all available, and it's incumbent upon donors to look at that when they're looking at making any type of donation, whether it's $5 or a very substantial donation.
Okay, now, because, again, I'm Mr. Everyman, I ask the dumb questions. What is the difference between a charity, a charity, and a nonprofit organization?
They're one and the same.
They are.
They're one and the
nonprofits
same.
are founded on a charitable mission. To be able to get that status from the IRS, that organization, when they apply, have to demonstrate the charitable mission.
Okay, because I used to do years ago, before either of you were probably born. I actually
Somehow I doubt it.
I used to do the Jerry Lewis telethons for KPAX, all right? And they would send us every year to Las Vegas to meet Jerry Lewis and get our pictures taken and all that stuff. And one of the really, really big deals was that the big accountant guy would come out and say, okay, if people ask you, what percentage of the money they're giving actually goes to helping the kids with MS as opposed to going to pay whoever or whatever. Here is the breakdown. And that was a really, really big deal. So is it the same locally?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Most nonprofits of any size are audited. Every well-managed, well-governed nonprofit should have internal systems and controls and volunteer leaders who are monitoring their expenses and their finances. Board oversight is tremendously important. When you see nonprofits run amok, and there's no widespread evidence of this fraud, waste, and abuse in the nonprofit sector, but when it happens, you show me a dysfunctional nonprofit, and I will see a board asleep at the switch.
Okay. All right.
I like that Susan almost challenged you to an old off a second ago.
I basically just want to see a picture of you with Jerry Lewis.
See, I don't actually believe anyone is older than Peter. So someday we should have a competition.
Actually,
do you remember crossing the Delaware?
Actually,
do you remember Giza?
When I met Jerry, this is true, absolute true story. Okay, and we got to remember that he's meeting like 600 hosts from television stations all over the country, one after the other, meeting them, shaking hands, exhausting for the guy, right? So I come in, and they hustle me up there, and here's the cameras and the lights, and I stuck my hat out, and the guy said, "This is Peter Christian from Missoula, Montana." He says, "Peter Christian, Jerry Jew, how are you?" Nice to. I mean, the guy was amazing.
I love it.
So
I love it.
So I do have those pictures somewhere. But anyway, we do have a caller.
Peter Christian, Jerry Jew. I'd like to meet Jack Mormon. That'd be a good trifecta right
Very
there.
good.
Stop
Very
it.
good.
All right, Dave's on the line. Hi, Dave. What's on your mind?
Well, this is an excellent show, and I don't want to take away from the good work that your guests and many, many nonprofits
Oh,
do
go
here
ahead.
in
That's all
Missoula.
right.
But I got to remind you of a couple incidents. Number one, Yellowstone National Park, President Clinton was in a remote, desolate area of the park to look at the wolf reintroduction program. Great event because the Cadillac, the presidential limousine, went by in the background when they tried to pretend they were far, far away from any road. And he also announced that the conservation groups better move his points forward better than they were doing, or they would not get his support anymore. He actually told a lot of those conservation groups they better help move his numbers towards the next reelection if they wanted more support.
Okay, thanks for the call, Dave. So they're both shaking their head. They don't remember that.
Not something I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
I'm
maybe.
qualified to comment.
All right.
I think I'll stretch his comment out a little bit because there is a concern, obviously we had mentioned lobbying earlier in the show, and that's something that obviously you rubbing shoulders with politicians, you're talking with them directly in the form of lobbying. That's assuming that you're a registered lobbyist organization, which the nonprofits that do this usually are, right?
Are they hire lobbyists?
Sure. So I guess the question that a lot of people have is when they see the connection between politics and nonprofits. And for some people, that kind of gives them a little queasy feeling, especially if they're on the other side of the political aisle, right? But there's a lot of groups out there that are simply there to push an agenda through a candidate, right? I mean, many of these have what we call super PACs, and those are considered nonprofits, right?
Right, 501c4s, as we were talking earlier.
Yeah, and in those situations, again, people who donate to that, they can't deduct those donations from their taxes. So that's a very big difference when we're looking at comparing that to charitable 501c3 organizations. But yeah, I mean, politics is pervasive in the for-profit, nonprofit, and it's up to us as good consumers and good donors to be aware of that. And we all have various opinions about the levels that that happens. So I don't know, Susan.
Yeah, I mean, as Andrea said, politics are pervasive everywhere. We don't give up our citizens' rights just because we work for a nonprofit. And many of us believe in advancing the interests of the people that we serve, in part through changing public policy.
Okay, so with that, we'll take a break, and we have all three lines open, 721-1290. Stay with us. We would love to hear from you. Like I said, all three lines are open, or you can make your comment on our Facebook page. We're coming right back. Oh, yeah, 721-1290 is the number. Joining us in studio, we're talking about nonprofits. Andrea Vernon, who's political science professor, specializes in nonprofit administration, and Susan Hay Patrick, the CEO of the United Way of Missoula County, are both here with us in studio. All right, so John had a question for you, but he's taking a caller right now, so go ahead. What do you got?
Yeah, I got Sue on the line, on line one. But before we get to Sue, a big question. It's about the history of nonprofits because, I've lived overseas and I've watched other countries. I've, read a little bit about the ones I haven't been to. And it doesn't seem like nonprofits play the role in other countries that they do here in the United States. So I was kind of hoping if you could either verify that that's true, and if it is, why? What's the history of nonprofits in the U.S.?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. No other country in the world has our rich tradition of charitable endeavors, of advancing the common good, something that Alexis de Tocqueville talked about when he toured America, the French writer who toured philosopher who toured America in the 1800s and talked about this uniquely American trait of believing that sort of the rising tide lifts all boats, that what is good for that Americans link their own happiness to the happiness of their fellow man to a great extent.
He coined that term, habits of the heart.
Habits of the heart. I like that. And
let's steal that.
In some other, it sounds like a Hallmark movie, but it probably is a Hallmark movie. But in many countries, the government plays a much stronger role in providing for its citizens than we do in America. We have put the public trust in private hands by asking nonprofits to fill this important void. And I think we do a heroic job in general as a sector of doing things that Andrea said at the beginning of the show that government and the business community can't or won't do.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of this result of our democratic and capitalist society that we've created in America, because it's not profitable for a business to come in and feed hungry people. And it's not efficient for a government to come in and house homeless people. So they look to local communities to build those types of organizations, again, to meet those needs and fill that void
and yet
of services.
There seems to be plenty of government money available to go to those organizations.
And that's
right?
where we get back to that concept of the social contract.
Okay.
The government, there's a reason these organizations are tax exempt. The government sees greater value in those organizations hanging on to those tax dollars to be able to invest them in programs and services that the government can't or won't do. So that's where this social contract comes in, where the government is relying on the ability of the nonprofit sector to be effective in providing those programs and services. So they are foregoing the tax dollar, and in the general sense, as tax-paying citizens, we are placing trust in those nonprofits to use that money to provide for charitable purposes and do good.
For the public
good.
good.
For the public good.
So,
Exactly.
Peter, you took me on at the beginning of the show when I said a lot of times the people who are complaining about the number of nonprofits and complaining about nonprofits asking for money generally are the same people who wouldn't want more government money going to things. And for me, you just can't have it both ways.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Let's get to the phone and say good morning to Sue. Good morning, Sue. What's on your mind, ma'am?
Good morning. I just wanted to take this opportunity to share an experience I had last evening with a Lowell school teacher, and to thank Susan for her work on behalf of the bond issue. They are so excited about the changes that are going to happen at Lowell School, and that wouldn't have happened without the bond issue passing. And so I really want to thank Susan for just working the way so hard and working how she did. I just really can't express how much I appreciate that. So there you go.
Thank you so much. I that was something I did as a private citizen, not as United Way CEO, although I think anything that strengthens education is consistent with the mission of United Way, which is all about, one of our tenets is all about student success, helping kids stay and succeed in school. And you can't do that in the 21st century with 20th or late 19th century facilities. And so I was happy to spend my volunteer time working really hard, and I'm really proud of the voters for seeing the vision of what is possible for our kids. So thank you, Sue.
Anything else, Sue?
That's it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks for the call. Okay, all three lines open, 721-1290.
So during the show, we've talked a little bit about 501c3s. We've talked about a little bit about 501c4. We had a question from one of our listeners who I can't read from this far away, but it was about, is the Clinton Foundation a nonprofit? And I think the answer is going to be yes for that. And a lot of people wonder, are a lot of these nonprofit organizations the way they've become organized basically because of the tax code? Did the tax code create nonprofits, or the other way around, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually the other way around. When we first started seeing the formalization of voluntary associations in the late 1800s and early 1900s, this was during the industrial age, when folks like Carnegie and Rockefeller were amassing huge amounts of wealth. And Carnegie in particular started realizing, I can do something good with my wealth. And he and Rockefeller are sort of the forefathers of philanthropy. And so they started foundations, which is what the Clinton Foundation is. So foundations are a type of nonprofit organization. They're kind of specialized because they are a funding source for what we consider, our everyday nonprofits like food banks and after-school programs.
So basically, a grant writer for a small organization in Missoula
Yes.
would write a grant and send it to the Clinton Foundation, hoping to get money.
Perhaps, yeah. So
Is that right?
there's
Probably
many
not to
types
that
of
foundation
right.
because I don't think they fund domestically.
No,
but-
exactly. So every
Right.
foundation has a different area of emphasis that they like to fund. So the Washington Foundation, for example, funds a lot of education initiatives here in Missoula and statewide. So every foundation has its own little special niche, and some of those foundations are built on private individual money, so they're considered family foundations. There's corporations that start foundations, so they will put a portion of their profits into a foundation to be able to give it back, give out in the form of grants to nonprofits. We also have operating or research foundations. So like the Christopher Reeves Foundation is an example I use with my students that do research on spinal cord injury. So a lot of their money that's donated, cancer foundations, breast cancer foundations, that money goes into research.
Okay, we're going to come right back. This is fascinating stuff. I'll bet you didn't know. 721-1290 is our number. If you have a question or a comment, we'd love to hear from you. We have about 15, 17 minutes left in the program, so we'll be right back. Everybody. Yeah.
Ow! She's got the moves.
I have to dance.
I mean, ow, I just hurt myself. All right, 721-1290 is our number. That's John King. I'm Peter Christian. We're having way too much fun in the studio. All right, Andrea Verda joining us, political science professor specializing in nonprofit administration, and Susan Hay Patrick, CEO of the United Way of Missoula County. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is actually an urgent question for Montana nonprofits. It's my understanding in my discussions with the Department of Revenue that there's a filing.
You call them on a regular basis, do you?
I do, actually. You could ask them. I know them by name. But yeah,
Marianne Dunwell.
Marianne Dunwell and I were just talking
Good for
yesterday. I spoke with them actually this week on Tuesday about the status of nonprofits and a new form they have to fill out to keep their property taxes.
Property tax exemption.
Thank you. The property tax exemption form. But my conversation with her was a little disturbing in that most of the nonprofits, they estimate around 6,000 or so in Montana, most had not sent the paperwork in yet, and it's due March 1st. Anyway, so I thought I'd maybe ask you about that. What's going on here? Is this something new for Montana, or has it always been here, or what?
And Susan, have you sent yours in?
It is going in this week. We talked about it at our board meeting on Tuesday. We are well aware of it.
Okay, just check it.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. I mean,
Yeah, we
I
are
work with
reapplying.
students, every day, and people always wait till the last minute. I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's grant writing or an assignment or a new application you have to submit to the state. This is a new process. It's something that our last legislative session was approved in the last legislative session to have nonprofits be able to resubmit and validate their property tax exempt status. So there is a set of paperwork that's available on the Department of Revenue website. It's not super onerous. I don't know, Susan.
Right.
If you
No, not at all.
looked at the
And
paperwork.
not every nonprofit pays property tax, but the government is always taking a look at other sources of revenue, and I think they just want to make sure that charities are doing what they say they do, and we pay a property tax on the portion of our building that we lease to a nonprofit tenant. So it's important for us to. Some caller said, do you pay any taxes, or asked, or maybe you asked, and yes, that's a tax that many nonprofits pay.
Let me ask you this, and you particularly, Susan, do you feel that now, because you're directly involved day to day, do you feel that there is more demanded of you from government agencies accountability than, say, a for-profit business, or is it even Steven, or what?
I've worked in nonprofits for 35 years, so I'm not an expert on government requirements of businesses. I think we take very seriously the filing of our annual 990. It's not just the numbers, but it's also a narrative about the work that we do. We use it as a tool to let the public know that we are indeed doing what we say we're doing with the dollars they trust us with. So I would not say that we feel we are suffering from government overreach. We think that the 990 is the principal way in which we ensure that we are complying with sound principles of fiscal management.
So what I'm hearing you saying is you don't feel like you have a government official standing beside you or looking over your shoulder every day?
No.
Okay. All right.
No. I feel like we have a vigilant board of directors, which every nonprofit should need, that pays attention to things and makes sure that we are run in a business-like way. And we take that seriously as well.
Okay, go ahead, John.
So you had mentioned there's a lot of nonprofits in Missoula. We talked about something like 6,000 in the state of Montana. When it comes to nonprofits, how much space is taken up? I mean, all of these can't be big. Which ones play the biggest role in our lives in Montana?
Great question.
That is a good question. And, again, going back to my notes here, 34% of Montana nonprofits pay wages. So that means 34% of the 6,000 roughly have paid staff. And that's probably one of the reasons we haven't, that these forms aren't being submitted, because most of our organizations are volunteer run. And
something like 81% of them of Montana nonprofits have budgets of less than $100,000. So we're a very strong and vibrant sector, but we're also quite fragile.
Exactly. And it is. We see a great diversity of services in what these nonprofits do. And I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question.
Well, the University of Montana and many of our hospitals are not-for-profit, but so too are the little food pantry, the soccer club, the garden club.
So when we think of big nonprofits in Montana, University of Montana, St. Patrick Hospital, those are the things that come to your mind first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Healthcare, yes, and universities.
Healthcare and education are the big ones.
We'll be right back. A 1-minute break is our last one, and we'll be right back after this. 721-1290 is our number, and 2 lines are open right now. We're coming right back. Hey, thanks for joining us here on Talkback. And we just had a call a second ago for Susan asking how much of the money.
91%.
Wow, 91% of the money.
Our management and administrative costs are 9%.
Okay, so 91% of the money that's donated to United Way in Missoula County actually goes to services.
Directly benefits people in our community.
Okay, well, there you go. You asked the question, we get the answer. All right, Jim's on the line. Good morning, Jim. Thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Excuse me, I'm on speakerphone driving, but
is
it true that the national president of United Way makes upwards of $400,000 a year? And what justifies that much of a salary? And do you make similar money?
Okay, Jim asked, the national director of United Way makes $400,000, and how much do you make?
Oh, that's good. You know what? I think I respect my own right to privacy. People can go online But I make more than a lot of people in town and less than a lot of people in town. And my salary and all salaries at United Way are benchmarked against other United Ways of similar size.
Well, and I know that the biggest offender is UNICEF internationally, where their executives fly around in big jets and stuff. What would make your typical donor want to donate, knowing that people, have such extravagant.
Sadly, I do not have a jet. But I think.
But she does take the bus.
I think excessive compensation is an issue, but I think it is much less of an issue. I think there's a lot of misinformation that gets bandied about the internet. If you go to Snopes.com and check out some of the salary figures, these grossly inflated salaries, you find that the facts are somewhat different. But these people are running multi-million-dollar agencies, and if we're going to attract and retain good people, I think that compensating them competitively is a smart idea. Perhaps not in the high six-figure range.
There's an equity factor here. Like Susan said, these are CEOs of large, in some cases, international and national nonprofit organizations, because they're nonprofit, doesn't translate to say they shouldn't be paid or they shouldn't be paid adequately. We need to retain the top talent in this sector. Otherwise, we are going to be spending even more money on recruitment and ramping people up into those executive leadership positions. We would never question the CEO salary of Hewlett-Packard, for example, when the CEO of the National United Way organization is probably running a similar ship in terms of employee size, budget.
It's the world's largest nonprofit with revenues of $6 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a Fortune 500 company.
Yes,
for
so
sure.
the leader of that, the top CEO, needs to be compensated fairly. Again, that's up for debate as to what's fair, but this is an issue that strikes me at the heart when I hear people continually challenge. Well, why is that CEO paid that much? Well,
some people don't think we should be paid at all.
Yeah.
There is, we talked about this at the break, the tremendous pressure on nonprofits to constantly reduce overhead. I think sometimes gets in our way. We're not able to plan for the future, compensate employees fairly. Sometimes our facilities are falling apart. We're not keeping up with the technology. Sometimes nonprofits don't have the proper systems in place to encourage separation of financial duties. I encourage your listeners to go to theoverheadmyth.com, which is a movement to have people not judge nonprofits solely by their super low administrative costs. When I see those super low costs, I wonder what they aren't getting done.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things people have talked about twice now is the pay for some of these sites. So I went to Charity Navigator, which is a site you kind of recommended earlier as a way to see, and they actually have a top 10 list of highest paid salaries for low performing charities. I can read the list to you, but I wanted to read this statement real quick. They say, for charities to be successful, they need talented, experienced leaders. Those leaders command significant compensation, but highly compensated CEOs should also get the most out of the organization they lead. The leaders of these 10 organizations all have compensations above $200,000 and are among the highest paid executives of all charities of a similar size, yet their organizations have a low overall rating on Charity Navigator, either a 1 or 0 stars. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights gets their CEO $465,769. Lexington Institute $376,000. Washington Legal Foundation, Tiger Missing Link Foundation, Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations Fund,
Wow.
The Silk Road, not the restaurant, the Creative Coalition, American Center for Law and Justice, the BIO Ventures for Global Health, and the Institutes for Analysis of Global Security are all on their top 10 two highly paid, low-performing charities.
Real quickly, let's get this caller on. Good morning. Can I have your first name, please? You're on the air.
Myrna.
Myrna, okay, real quickly, what's your question for our guests?
I just want to know why nonprofits insist on harassing people on the telephone. They'll call, ask for money, and then if you say, well, I have my own charities, they won't get off the line until you actually have to hang up on them. And I would much prefer charities that say thank you for your $5 or $20 or whatever. But if you do donate to a nonprofit, it's like paying a bill, because a month later or even a week later, there's another letter in the mail saying, we need your money, so...
Yeah, I am so sorry you experienced that.
Sorry about that, yeah.
I think that good nonprofits don't harass their donors, and I think that people who feel that, I sympathize. I get those calls, too.
We have less than a minute left. So if people want to get more information about nonprofits to be better informed, so where should they go, Andrea?
Well, you can always go to the University of Montana website. We advertise our different nonprofit administration programs at www.umt.edu/nonprofit. The Montana Nonprofit Association website, mtnonprofit.org, is an excellent resource, as well as the United Way.
MissoulaUnitedWay.org.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Ladies, thank you for being with us. You guys are great sports. You put up with John and I, which is charity in itself.
It was not hard.
And we will come back tomorrow. I believe, John, we've got open phones tomorrow, right?
We might. I got things in the works. We'll see.
We'll see. He's always trying to surprise me. Okay, you guys have a great day and enjoy this beautiful sunshine, and we'll see you tomorrow at 6.